Hello, everyone. Tonight, we're traveling back to a time when gods bickered like neighbors, mortals were playthings, and Zeus. Yes, that Zeus decided the best way to woo someone was by turning into a goose. No, really. Tonight's tale will unfold slowly, like a scroll unrolling across starlit marble, with just enough strange details to distract your mind from the day's noise. You'll wander the echoing halls of Olympus Dodge, lightning bolts of boredom, and follow a divine game of shape-shifting tag across valleys and vineyards. You'll meet Nemesis, a goddess who wants nothing to do with Zeus's wing-flapping schemes, and watch as everything goes from mildly ridiculous to gently surreal. Just a heads up, ancient Greece is stunning, but you probably won't survive a week here unless you enjoy sandals with no traction and olive oil as sunscreen. Hey, if you're loving this content, I'd really appreciate it if you could give the video a quick like and hit that subscribe button. And if you're listening from a faraway place, whether it's 10 a.m. in Toronto or midnight in Kyoto, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're all drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin your stroll at the foot of Mount Olympus. Above you, clouds curl like whipped cream atop a divine dessert, hiding the squabbles of immortals from mortal eyes. It's oddly peaceful until you hear it. A thunderclap, not of rage, but of pure boredom. Zeus, king of the gods, reclines on a throne carved from cumulonimbus chin in hand, glaring at his weather portfolio. Rain in Macedonia. Again he grumbles. More fog in the Peloponnese. Riveting. Behind him, Hera adjusts her golden sandals and sighs loudly, the universal sound of a partner who's this close to banning you from dating apps forever. But Zeus isn't swiping. He's scanning the mortal realm through his patented divine scrying bowl, which tonight is floating in a small jacuzzi of lightning. He spots her, Nemesis, daughter of Nyx, goddess of balance vengeance, and absolutely not here for your nonsense. She's walking along a cliffside, humming to herself, robes fluttering in the sea breeze. She hasn't even glanced skyward. You drift beside Zeus as he leans forward. Look at that composure, that poise, that total and utter disinterest. I must have her. You're already skeptical, but Zeus is undeterred. He stands crackling slightly, with static, and announces, "She will love me. Eventually. Probably. Okay, maybe, but I will try." His voice booms across Olympus, causing several junior gods to spill their ambrosia lattes. Now Zeus could just talk to her. But where's the drama in that? This is a man who once turned into a shower of gold to woo someone through a roof. So of course he pulls out his divine idea tablet, basically a glowing scroll, and starts brainstorming transformations. Lion, no too bitey. Swan, been there. Giant eagle too. Predator vibes. Then he pauses. What about a goose? You stare at him. Even the winds go silent for a second. Imagine Zeus says, eyes wide with inspiration, a majestic, shimmering goose, irresistible, graceful, a real honker of love. You resist the urge to honk back. Here's your first historical fact in ancient Greece. Geese were actually seen as symbols of vigilance. They were kept in temples, and legend has it, they once saved Rome by honking at invading Gauls. Zeus may be ridiculous, but at least he's historically adjacent. He snaps his fingers. The lightning flickers. Suddenly, where a king once stood there waddles a goose, a very shiny goose, golden feathers, diamond eyes, and a strut that says, "I'm ready for romance." Zeus tries to flap, but forgets he has no idea how wings work. He tumbles off the throne and lands in a decorative nectar pond. Somewhere a muse giggles behind her lyre. As you follow his wobbly ascent, you note this odd little tidbit. According to certain fringe versions of the myth, Zeus tried this transformation multiple times with a new bird each week. Historians still argue whether the goose incident was first last or just a misunderstanding by a scribe with terrible ornithology. Regardless, the scene is set. Zeus, in full feathered glory, is about to begin his most ridiculous pursuit yet. Down below, Nemesis still walks unbothered. She picks a fig from a tree and hums a lullaby older than Olympus. The sea sighs. The cliffs glow faintly in the setting sun, and up above you glides silently behind a goose with ambition as the sky darkens into myth. Zeus, now fully goosified and glimmering like he's been dipped in stardust, and vanity awkwardly flaps his way down from Olympus. You trail behind him, watching feathers float like golden snowflakes in the air. He's not quite flying, more like ambitious gliding with a touch of divine clumsiness. Below Nemesis meanders along a winding path near the Aegean coast, still blissfully unaware that the king of gods has decided she's today's crush. The air is thick with salt, and sun cicadas droning their sleepy symphony from fig branches. A warm breeze picks up rustling her robe, and she stops briefly to admire a beetle struggling heroically with a crumb. You glance back up. Zeus is mid-descent, overshoots the path by about a mile, and crash lands into a bush of aromatic thyme with a very undignified honk. Somewhere in the distance, a farmer's dog starts barking. The gods clearly are not known for subtle entrances. But no matter, Zeus emerges from the shrubbery, fluffing his wings, adjusting his regal posture, and sauntering goose step and all toward the shoreline. The chase begins. Back on the cliff, Nemesis hears something, a soft shuffling, a honk that sounds like it's trying to be seductive. She turns around. Nothing but the wind, and a single, very glossy goose staring at her like he's got a Shakespearean sonnet tucked under his wing. She narrows her eyes. Now here's your historical fact. Nemesis was no minor figure. In early Greek worship, she wasn't just the goddess of retribution, but also of balance and deserved fortune. Her temples dotted the coasts, and sailors often left her offerings before voyages. She symbolized the idea that excess, whether wealth, pride, or apparently goose romance, would eventually be punished. And speaking of excess, Zeus begins his approach. He waddles closer, doing what can only be described as the divine goose equivalent of a peacock display. Tail feathers shimmer. He honks with flair. He attempts a little hop-skip wing twirl. Nemesis stares. There's a pause, a long contemplative pause that stretches like warm taffy in the Greek sun. Then she turns and walks away. Zeus blinks, honks once, louder this time. She doesn't turn back. This is when it becomes clear to everyone except Zeus. Nemesis is not impressed, not by his feathers, not by his glow, not by the faint harp music he's somehow conjuring around himself. She begins to walk faster, not a run yet, but brisk. Zeus follows, confused, but undeterred, and you hover quietly, caught between admiration for Nemesis's patience and second-hand embarrassment for the king of Mount Olympus. Now for a delightfully quirky tidbit. In some obscure local myths near Rhamnus, Nemesis's main sanctuary, people believed she carried a measuring rod and bridal literal tools to rein in pride and arrogance. It's safe to say if anyone had the divine authority to leash a goose god, it was her. Zeus doesn't care. He thinks this is going great. He flaps again, picks up speed, and starts honking a rhythm that vaguely resembles an ancient love song. You suspect he's making it up as he goes. But Nemesis, graceful as ever, glances back and finally breaks into a run. And just like that, it's a foot race. Or foot vis webbed foot race. You soar above, watching this bizarre duo, one divine woman in flowing robes, darting over olive-rooted trails, and one desperate airborne goose chasing after her like a windswept feather duster in a toga. Now historians still debate whether this myth originally involved Nemesis at all. In some versions, she's replaced by Leda, or combined with her entirely, depending on the storyteller's flair. The goose form, that detail shows up only in later Roman-era fragments and vase paintings that, let's be honest, raise more questions than they answer. But you're not worried about canon accuracy tonight. You're here for the slow, silly unraveling of a god's terrible plan and a goddess's remarkable patience. The sun begins to dip lower, staining the cliffs gold and rust. Below, the sea rolls gently, catching the last of the light. The chase continues, one honk at a time, and you, floating along with the breeze, wonder how long it will take for Zeus to realize that maybe, just maybe, goose-based courtship is not the future of divine romance. You've seen some odd pursuits in your mythic travels, but nothing quite like this. A radiant goose, galloping downhill, wings flailing, eyes love-struck, while a composed goddess glides just out of reach. Robes barely stirring hair, unmussed expression, deeply unimpressed. Zeus is gaining ground, not because he's fast, but because Nemesis, despite her speed, keeps stopping to shake her head and mutter things like, "Seriously, and was the swan not weird enough?" You drift alongside her as she veers left down a narrow goat path, slipping into a grove of laurel trees. The air smells like crushed herbs and dust. Birds scatter at her passing, and behind her comes Zeus, honking more desperately now, like a romantic accordion losing air. Here's your historical fact of the evening. In ancient Greek literature, gods shape-shifting into animals to woo mortals was practically a pastime. Poseidon became a stallion. Apollo once took the form of a hawk. And yes, Zeus was the most prolific transformer of them all, appearing as bulls, serpents, golden mists, and yes, once even an ant. A literal ant. The man had range, but a goose, that's new. Zeus takes off again, flapping over the grove, barely clearing the treetops. A startled squirrel pelts him with an acorn. Nemesis darts between two gnarled trees and into open fields of rippling grass. The wind picks up, bending the stalks like waves. You ride the breeze with her, a divine game of tag beneath the rising moon. And here's your delightful fringe tidbit in a lesser-known version of this tale, preserved in the margin notes of a 4th century manuscript. It's said that Zeus briefly forgot how to honk convincingly. A shepherd reportedly spotted the shining bird mid-chase and commented, "That's the worst goose impression I've ever heard." Some say the shepherd was turned into a cloud. Others insist he was rewarded with an orchard. Mythology can never decide on the consequences of sarcasm. Back on the chase, Nemesis now reaches the foot of a low hill dotted with ancient stones. She pauses, not out of exhaustion, but calculation. She's measuring how far she's come. The coast is now far behind. The stars are brighter, and her pursuer still clucking and flapping like an overzealous parade float. She lifts her arms and calls the wind, not harshly, not to stop him, but simply to refresh herself. A gust rushes past you both, cool and briny, carrying the faint scent of firewood and figs from a nearby village. For a moment, the world slows. The sea hushes. Even Zeus seems to hover mid-flap, confused by the pause. The Nemesis is off again faster, now crossing into terrain sacred to Artemis. And that's when things change. In the distance, you spot a faint glow, the moonlight thickening, pooling strangely in the air. The trees here grow taller, silver-barked and whispering secrets. The very earth beneath your feet tingles with quiet power. Welcome to Artemis's domain. Now historians still argue whether this crossover was intentional storytelling or simply the result of oral myths blending over time. But the gods were a nosy bunch, and it tracks that Artemis, ever vigilant over women and wild things, would eventually notice one of her peers being chased by a goose. You feel the shift before it's visible. The air chills slightly, the shadows sharpen, and then she appears. Artemis steps from the trees, bow slung casually across her back, a half smile playing on her lips. She watches Zeus flounder toward them and raises one perfect eyebrow. What she says slowly, "Are you doing?" Zeus skids to a stop, honks, swallows his pride in a mouthful of feathers. Nemesis doesn't even glance at him. She nods to Artemis and says, "Don't ask." There's a moment, just a flicker, where the Olympian queen of the hunt considers firing a warning shot. But instead, she simply waves a hand, and the wind picks up again harder now. You lean into it as the divine goose is pushed slightly off course, tumbling awkwardly into a patch of wild thyme. Again, Nemesis, still as a statue, exhales through her nose and walks on. You hover beside Artemis as she turns to you and says, "He'll figure it out eventually." Or not. The moon rises higher, silvering the hills, and the chase, ridiculous and poetic, continues into the night. Zeus, now thoroughly dusted in thyme leaves and pride flaps once, twice, and manages to regain a semblance of airlift. He rises shakily, like a kite launched by an overexcited child, and wobbles after Nemesis with the grim determination of a god who refuses to admit defeat, especially when feathers are involved. You hover overhead, catching your breath, not from exertion, but from the sheer absurdity of it all. Below, Nemesis runs with grace. She's not sprinting anymore. This isn't fear or even annoyance. It's more like she's playing along now. Because, hey, when a divine goose chases you for half the length of Thessaly, you eventually start treating it like a casual hobby. The trail leads you both down into a vast olive grove, where ancient knotted trees throw long shadows across the earth. The air is filled with the scent of pressed olives and soil warmed by centuries. Somewhere, an owl hoots disapprovingly. Zeus dives low, banking hard to the left, trying to intercept her. He misses by a feather's width, lands awkwardly on a donkey cart, and honks in frustration. The donkey, a professional at ignoring chaos, merely flicks its tail. Here's your historical fact for the night. Olive oil, especially in ancient Greece, was considered sacred. It wasn't just for cooking, it was for lighting lamps, anointing bodies, and symbolizing peace. Entire city-states measured their economy and diplomacy in amphorae of the stuff. Temples had trees that were never to be cut. Rumor had it they were gifts from Athena herself. So, of course, Zeus lands squarely in a sacred press basin, slides through it like a divine slip and slide, and emerges shimmering with extra virgin shame. Nemesis doesn't stop. She's long out of the grove now, climbing a low ridge where ruins cling to the hillside like memories too old to forget. You float beside her, marveling at her composure. Now for your quirky tidbit, some scattered fragments in late Hellenistic texts claim this entire myth might have been a dramatic retelling of seasonal change. Zeus the goose, representing winter pursuit, Nemesis representing spring's flight, and the eventual stillness of the chase marking the summer solstice. Most scholars scoff, but one papyrus found in a jar near Thebes includes doodles of what looks suspiciously like a goose with thunderbolts for wings. Interpret that as you will. At the crest of the hill, Nemesis pauses not from fatigue, but to take in the view. Below her, plains stretching out like sleeping giants, villages dotting the valleys, a distant temple bell chiming the shift to twilight. The sky has turned a dusky plum color, and stars blink open slowly one by one. And Zeus is attempting a running takeoff, flapping furiously down a slope, tongue hanging out in a very un-goose-like fashion. You can almost hear him muttering, almost there between pants. He gets airborne barely before clipping a cypress and doing a slow-motion barrel roll into a bush. He's fine. His dignity, not so much. You trail him as he shakes off leaves, adjusts his wings and honks again, this time softer, less triumphant, almost contemplative. This is new. Zeus watches Nemesis in the distance. She hasn't turned to look, not even once. And suddenly you can feel it, the faintest shift in him. A flicker of realization, maybe. That this isn't just a game, that some pursuits are not meant to end in conquest. That maybe, just maybe, the goose idea wasn't his best. Now here's your scholarly debate moment. Some ancient sources suggest this myth was originally meant as a cautionary tale, not about love, but about hubris, that even gods with all their power can make fools of themselves when they ignore consent and chase novelty. Others argue it was simply comedic, a way to mock Zeus without directly insulting the divine, a sort of sanctioned satire for the ancient audience. You glide beside Zeus as he stops at the edge of a small stream. His reflection stares back at him, wide-eyed, feathered, and faintly ridiculous. He doesn't honk. He doesn't flap. He just stands there. Above the stars, wheel on. Around him, the grove sighs in sleep, and for the first time in the entire pursuit, Zeus seems still. The stream trickles quietly beside you, its surface shimmering under starlight like a scroll of spilled silver ink. Zeus remains motionless, staring at his reflection feathers, gently rippling in the breeze. You float just behind him, uncertain if you're witnessing divine introspection or simply a goose processing the limits of romance. Across the valley, Nemesis has reached the ruins of an old watchtower. She doesn't look back. She doesn't need to. When you're a goddess of retribution, you feel when you've successfully dodged a thunderbolt in feathered form. Zeus lowers his beak. Now here's your historical fact in ancient Greek rituals. Streams were seen as sacred borders, thresholds between states of being. People often washed in them before entering temples, and some streams were believed to erase memory. The Lethe, for instance, was said to wash away all pain. Fitting, isn't it, that the king of gods might be hoping this water will rinse away at least a few moments of avian embarrassment. He dips a foot into the stream, shivers, pulls it back out. Not magical then, just cold. Then a noise, a rustle in the olive trees. Zeus snaps alert. You both turn to see a cluster of mortal villagers approaching with baskets, oil lamps, and sleepy curiosity. They're singing a harvest hymn, the kind that's passed down more by repetition than meaning, and their robes flutter like moth wings in the dark. Zeus panics. He flaps once, twice, and bolts into the underbrush, tumbling beak over tail into a ditch filled with mint. The villagers pause. One squints at the shrubbery. Did that goose just sparkle? The group murmurs, shrugs, and continues on as if gods in disguise were just as part of the usual evening drama. In this part of the world, they might be. Your quirky tidbit in some surviving comedic plays from the later classical period gods, disguised as animals, were a frequent gag. There are even fragments of a lost farce titled Zeus, Goose, and Grape, where the entire punchline revolves around the inability of a divine goose to climb stairs. Scholars argue whether this was inspired by the myth you're witnessing now, or if this is the origin. Either way, the chase is not over. Zeus shakes the mint from his feathers and waddles out of the ditch with all the dignity of a monarch who's accidentally joined a children's play. He looks up toward the ruins. Nemesis is gone again. But she left a trail, a faint shimmer in the air, a whisper in the tall grass. The gods always leave traces. He flaps into the air once more this time, with less theatrics and more determination. Not desperate, not romantic, just determined, like someone chasing a feeling they can't quite name. And that's when you notice it too. The atmosphere has shifted. The farce of the goose has grown quieter, like a joke that's run its course and left something stranger in its wake. Not solemnity exactly, but a kind of gentle melancholy. The kind you get after laughing too hard for too long and remembering, oh, right, this was supposed to be love. Historians still argue whether the myth was ever finished. Some say Zeus caught Nemesis and she turned into a fish to escape. Others say he gave up and wandered off to bother Leda next. A few versions suggest Nemesis turned into a goose herself, and the two simply flew away in opposite directions, each refusing to be chased any longer. But right now, you're still here in the moment, between pursuit and pause, between thunder and silence, between goose and God. Zeus glides low following the trail. He doesn't honk this time. He doesn't preen. He simply flies. And you glide beside him, quiet now, listening only to the rhythm of his wings against the moonlit air. The night stretches on velvety and quiet, with only the sound of Zeus's slow, rhythmic wing beats to mark the passage of time. You hover nearby, riding the gentle thermals rising from the warm earth below the stars, spinning softly overhead, like flecks of crushed pearl scattered across black silk. Zeus flies lower now, not urgently, not frantically, just steadily, like a goose with feelings. He glides over vineyards where grapes hang heavy with sleep, their skins shimmering in moonlight. A pair of napping shepherds lie curled beneath a fig tree, unaware that a divine poultry drama is unfolding in the skies just above their dreams. Here's your historical fact for this dreamy stretch. Vineyards in ancient Greece weren't just for wine, they were sacred. Dionysus, the god of wine and madness, was believed to bless vines with both abundance and a touch of divine chaos. Some farmers would even hang tiny offerings in the branches, seashells, bits of bronze, scraps of red cloth, anything to invite the favor of the divine and maybe keep away unexpected visits from particularly amorous deities in animal form. Zeus dips lower his shadow skimming across the vineyard. He passes a stone column wrapped in ivy, and you see a faint carving near its base, two geese beaks touching their wings, shaped like a crescent moon. Even here, it seems the myth has left its mark. He lands. The field is soft beneath his feet, rows of dark grapevines curving gently into the distance. Zeus folds his wings and looks around. No Nemesis, no wind, just silence and the gentle chirr of insects humming their nighttime lullaby. You settle nearby, unsure what comes next. Then a faint rustle. From the far edge of the field, near a crumbling shrine to Eileithyia, the goddess of childbirth, and curiously, interruptions, emerges a figure, tall, poised, glistening like moonlit marble. It's Nemesis. She doesn't look surprised to see him. Of course she doesn't. She's the goddess of inevitability. She stops a good 20 feet away, arms crossed. Zeus takes one step forward, then trips over a vine root. You stifle a laugh but can't help it. Nemesis doesn't smirk, but her eyebrows make a small, subtle gesture that could easily translate to, "You've got to be kidding me." Here's your odd little tidbit for the night. Some local myths around Arcadia say Nemesis had a pet goose named Acus who could detect divine nonsense from miles away. It would flap violently, whenever a god tried something sketchy. No records confirm whether Acus ever honked at Zeus directly, but based on current behavior, it's possible Acus retired out of pure exhaustion. Zeus rights himself and stands tall. Well, as tall as one can in goose form. His wings droop. His glow has dimmed slightly, like a lantern at dawn. He opens his beak, then closes it. He tries again, and then finally he honks. But it's not a flashy honk, not a showy feather-fluttering display. It's quiet, almost apologetic. Nemesis tilts her head. You watch silent as the breeze picks up again, rustling the vines between them. For a moment, neither god moves. There is no chase, no show, just a strange stillness shared between beings who are both ancient, powerful, and somehow very, very tired. Now here's where historians start arguing again. Was this the moment when Nemesis forgave him? Did she accept his courtship? Or was this her moment of final judgment, letting Zeus experience the rare sting of humility? There's no answer in the records. No conclusive vase painting, just this mythic gap, this pause in which anything might have happened, or nothing at all. The wind dies down. Nemesis turns slowly and begins to walk away. Not running, just walking. Zeus watches her go. He doesn't follow, and that might be the most shocking thing of all. You hover above the vineyard as the breeze cools and the vines sway gently, like they too are sighing at the sight of Zeus, golden-feathered and profoundly still. He doesn't chase Nemesis this time. He doesn't flap, doesn't honk, doesn't even strut. He just watches her recede into the shadows, her form melting into the soft gray of olive trees and dusk. It's unfamiliar terrain for a god like Zeus. This waiting, this not winning. You see it in the tilt of his beak, the slow lowering of his wings. He's not used to letting someone walk away, not without thunder, not without a dramatic cloud exit, not without at least turning into something new and confusing. But here he stays. Now here's your historical fact for tonight. In the ancient Greek understanding of divinity, gods were not moral in the human sense. They were forces, primal, unapologetic, vast. Yet myths like this, strange and small as they are, offered glimpses of gods behaving with something close to restraint. A reminder, perhaps, that even the mighty have moments of quiet learning. You drift closer as Zeus waddles slowly to the edge of the vineyard, stepping carefully between baskets and dew-wet vines. In the distance, a village bell tolls softly, the kind of bell that marks nothing urgent, just time passing as it always has. And then from the shadows comes another figure, smaller, mortal, a boy, maybe 10, in a tunic far too big for him, holding a single lantern and a cluster of figs. He stops when he sees the goose, blinks, rubs his eyes. "You're a funny-looking one," he says aloud. Zeus blinks back. The boy approaches cautiously, like someone trained by experience not to trust poultry. "You lost?" he asks. Zeus doesn't move. The boy shrugs and sits cross-legged on a flat rock beside the shrine. He breaks a fig open and sets half on the stone, pushing it toward the goose. "Here, don't say I never fed royalty." And just like that, you're witnessing something unthinkable. In most myths, Zeus, the god of thunder, ruler of Olympus, acceptor of tributes, and launcher of lightning bolts, quietly nibbling half a fig next to a barefoot child. Now for your fringe tidbit. There's a lesser-known regional festival on the island of Lesbos, recorded only in a fragmentary travelogue from the 2nd century BCE, where villagers would parade geese dressed in bronze crowns and feed them figs dipped in wine. The myth behind it long lost, but some scholars speculate it was tied to this very story, or to the even stranger ones that followed. The boy hums softly as he eats some song without words. Zeus, still sparkling faintly, feathers ruffled pride, thoroughly preened, settles beside him. For a while, there's only the sound of crickets and fig juice dripping onto stone. Now here's the scholarly debate moment. Did Zeus learn something from this myth? Was it a turning point in his character, or simply a forgotten detour in a long line of whims and affairs? Some argue this was an allegory of divine humility. Others say it was a comedic tale meant to humble kings through laughter, but no one quite agrees on what the goose means. And maybe that's the point. You drift above them, the boy, the god, the moon rising silver over olive leaves. No thunderclaps, no fate-altering proclamations. Just a goose, chewing thoughtfully, beside someone who doesn't know and doesn't care that he's dining with Olympus. The boy yawns, curls up on the stone, and falls asleep, his tiny lantern still flickering beside him. Zeus blinks, tilts his head, and for the first time tonight seems content not to move. The lantern beside the boy flickers low, casting a sleepy amber halo that dances across Zeus's gleaming feathers. You drift a little higher, letting the vineyard fall away below the vines, curling and swaying like lazy ink strokes on parchment. The only movement now is the soft rise and fall of the child's chest as he dreams, and Zeus, still goose, still glowing, standing sentinel, beside him like the world's strangest guardian angel. He's watching the stars now. You can see it in the angle of his head. The sky is clear tonight, so clear that constellations seem close enough to pluck. Orion rises in the east, spear poised, and overhead, faint and small, the constellation Cygnus the Swan twinkles down like a cosmic callback. Zeus is thinking. You can tell, and that alone is enough to make the gods of Olympus nervous. Here's your historical fact for this moment. The Greeks were among the first to give names and stories to the stars, blending mythology and astronomy in ways that shaped sky maps for millennia. Cygnus, that swan-shaped cluster, was often associated with various bird-related myths, including awkwardly this one. Some say it was Zeus himself memorialized in feathers. Others say it was Orpheus, transformed into a swan after death. The stars don't clarify, they just shine. Zeus shifts slightly, his wings rustling, and you watch as a few loose feathers float upward, catching the breeze and rising toward the sky. A strange inversion feathers trying to become stars. There's a soft snore. The boy mutters something in his sleep, something about goats probably, and turns onto his side. Zeus doesn't move, but his expression, if geese can be said to have one, seems softer now, less like a ruler, more like a very confused, very tired cosmic mascot, and then faint, nearly missed a breeze brushes through the olive grove, and with it a laugh, not mocking, not cruel, just amused, familiar, feminine, nemesis. You don't see her, but you know she's nearby. Perhaps she never truly left. Perhaps she's been circling this whole time, watching the goose learn the long way, what she already knew. Some stories aren't meant to end in triumph. Some pursuits are better left unfinished. Some gods are better understood in silence. Now for your quirky tidbit. In a rare surviving passage from a 1st century BCE poet named Phanocles, there's a line that reads, "The goddess left him not with a slap nor a storm, but with the stillness of being forgotten." Scholars debate who the goddess is, but considering tonight's events, you might argue it fits Nemesis perfectly. Zeus turns very slowly and looks back toward the grove. His wings are still. The moon catches in his eyes. And then, with no fanfare, he steps away from the sleeping boy and wanders into the vineyard alone. You follow. The vines part before him, leaves brushing softly against his sides, like they recognize royalty even in such a ridiculous disguise. The earth is cool beneath his feet. Crickets chirp. A single frog croaks somewhere far off, and the stars keep turning. It's not a walk of defeat. It's not even really a retreat. It's more like a god taking the long way home, letting the night press gently against him like a blanket he doesn't quite deserve. Now, for your scholarly debate note. This entire myth was rarely depicted in Greek visual art, which some argue is because no one really knew how to draw a goose without making it look inherently ridiculous. Others think the story was an inside joke, one of many odd tales passed orally at symposia meant to make even the mightiest gods feel human under the weight of their own absurd choices. And as Zeus waddles deeper into the vines, you feel that weight too, not heavy, but not exactly light. Just strange, a kind of divine melancholy tucked beneath a downy coat. The moon dips lower, the vineyard sleeps, and the goose walks on glowing faintly, like a joke no one remembers how to laugh at anymore. The path through the vineyard narrows, and the moon now floats lower, casting long, slanted shadows across the soil. You drift slowly behind Zeus, whose glowing feathers catch flecks of silver light, illuminating the quiet rows of vines. The air is cool and damp, smelling of crushed grape leaves and old earth. There's a peace here, a peace the king of gods almost never visits. Zeus pauses at the edge of a stone terrace. Before him stretches a long-forgotten garden, overgrown quiet and softly alive with the hum of nighttime creatures. Moss carpets, broken tiles, and ancient statuary leans into the bushes as though trying to sleep, standing up. You float beside him as he surveys the ruins. There's a bench, cracked lichen-covered, and he climbs onto it awkwardly, his webbed feet slapping softly. He settles with a sigh that's half honk, half something older and sadder. Now here's your historical fact. The Greeks believed that some gardens, particularly those dedicated to nymphs and lesser goddesses, were sacred spaces of retreat, not just for mortals, but even for deities who needed quiet. They were not temples, not stages for offerings, but spaces for solitude, healing, reflection, maybe even regret. Zeus stares ahead. The garden's centerpiece, a small dry fountain, is surrounded by rosemary and night-blooming jasmine. The scent is thick sweet and sleep-inducing. You recognize it. It's the kind of scent mortals used in dream rituals, hoping for visions or gentle sleep. The kind of scent that soothes. It suits the moment. A few fireflies drift lazily around the base of the fountain, blinking like slow thoughts in the dark. One lands on Zeus's beak. He blinks at it, surprised, but doesn't shoo it away. Here's your quirky tidbit. A fragment of Pindar's Lost Odes makes a bizarre reference to the goose of golden paws, who slept beneath the stars and dreamed of what he could not catch. Most scholars believe it to be metaphorical. One insists it's literal and is often mocked for it at academic conferences, but tonight you begin to wonder. Zeus closes his eyes. Yes, still in goose form. There's something touching in that he doesn't transform back, doesn't command the heavens, doesn't start another pursuit. He just sits still for the first time in what may be centuries. Now comes your scholarly debate. Prompt was this myth a rare instance of divine narrative without resolution? Did the Greeks invent it as a sort of anti-story one, where nothing is gained, no prize is won, and the god in question learns a vague, sleepy lesson? Some argue it's an early satire. Others say it was meant for children as a bedtime story to explain why some stars wander across the sky. Maybe both are true. Zeus shuffles slightly on the bench. The jasmine-scented air thickens. A low mist begins to rise over the cracked stones. It pools at your feet, curling through the moss, softening everything it touches. Even your own thoughts feel fuzzy, dreamlike heavy. The garden hums, and in that hum, you feel it, the soft echo of Nemesis's steps, somewhere far off, always just out of sight. Not angry, not fleeing, just continuing her path as gods do. Zeus rests his head on his wing, and the king of gods, feathered and quiet, lets himself drift into a sleep, not disturbed by thunder or prophecy. You hover above, watching as the fireflies rise. The fountain settles into silence, and the ancient garden breathes around him. Morning comes slowly in this forgotten corner of the world, like honey dripping across stone. The mist thins. The stars retreat. Birds begin to sing, not in chorus, but in scattered, curious solo notes, like they're not quite sure if it's morning yet. You hover just above the garden, and there he still is, Zeus, curled upon the ancient bench. Feathers dulled with dew, wings tucked tightly around him. He stirs a little, but doesn't wake, not fully. Just shifts like a being who hasn't dreamed in a very long time, and now isn't quite sure what to do with one. You glide over the broken fountain, where tiny frogs have returned to their mossy kingdom, and then back toward the rows of grapevines, now gilded with the first blush of dawn. A few bees hover lazily in the chill air. Life is waking, but not Zeus. Now here's your historical fact. Gods in ancient Greek stories almost never slept. Not truly. They rested, they withdrew, but actual sleep, vulnerable, unguarded sleep, was reserved for mortals. Except for rare moments usually wrapped in myths of transformation, grief, or deep love, or apparently goose-induced exhaustion. And now for a strange little tidbit. There's a scrap of pottery in a museum in Thessaloniki that depicts a goose curled on a bench next to a temple altar. Scholars originally thought it was a farm scene, but a recently discovered inscription nearby reads, "Here, the king remembered to rest." Was it Zeus? A symbolic goose? A clever potter with a flair for mythic minimalism? No one knows. But the echo feels right. Zeus finally stirs. His eyes open, blinking slowly, adjusting to the warm light now stretching across the garden. His beak twitches. He lets out a long, slow exhale, less a honk, more a sigh that carries centuries. He doesn't rise. Not yet. He simply looks around. There is no nemesis, not even a trace, just rosemary and dew and the kind of silence that feels earned. This is where the story might have ended if not for a sound. Footsteps. You both turn. A man approaches along the path, gray-bearded and barefoot, his robe patched with many colors. He carries a wooden staff and hums something in a language older than Olympus. You recognize him immediately, not by name, but by presence. A wandering seer, one of those mortals who brushes up against myth like a wind touching both sides of a curtain. He stops when he sees the goose. "Ah," he says with a knowing nod, as though this is precisely the sort of thing he expected on a morning like this. Zeus blinks. The man lowers himself onto a rock near the bench. Sometimes, he says, we chase what cannot be caught. And sometimes, we catch a glimpse of ourselves instead. He breaks a piece of bread and lays it on the stone between them. You hover silently. Even the bees seem to pause. Then comes your scholarly debate moment. Is this figure a real player in the myth, an unnamed prophet, a trickster, a narrative device, or is he simply the voice of the story itself, made human for a moment, offering commentary before vanishing back into the folds of legend? Zeus doesn't reply. He doesn't change form. He doesn't ascend back into Olympus. He just leans down beak to bread and eats. And the man hums again. No grand wisdom, no thunder, just a tune that sounds like it was written in a dream. The sun climbs higher, the story drifts slower, and somewhere beyond the garden, in a place where myths wander when no one's telling them, Nemesis keeps walking, not fleeing, not fearing, just walking. As the old seer finishes his bread, he pats the bench gently right where Zeus now sits, all folded feathers and distant thoughts. This garden, he murmurs, not looking directly at the god, used to be a sanctuary for nymphs. They left when the olive press dried up. But some places remember. You're not sure if he's speaking to Zeus to the garden or to you. Maybe all three. Zeus turns his head slowly, not startled, just processing. You can almost see the wheels turning in that golden feathered head. The pursuit is over, but the question still floats. What now? The man rises with a creak, tucks a fig leaf behind his ear, and begins his slow shuffle toward the opposite edge of the garden. Keep flying if you must, he calls back. But maybe next time, choose better wind. He disappears behind a low wall, leaving only a trace of humming and the scent of time crushed beneath bare feet. You drift lower. Zeus stands. He shakes once, water droplets and dew scattering like tiny stars, and looks skyward. There's no immediate change, no crack of lightning, no swirling transformation, but you feel it begin like a ripple in warm water. Now here's your historical fact. Divine transformations in Greek myth were often tied to emotional states. When Proteus changed shape, it was usually to avoid conversation. When Thetis transformed, it was out of fear or desire to escape. And when Zeus shifted, it was rarely about survival, it was about control. But this time, there's no performance. Zeus takes a step forward, wings stretching slowly, then another, then almost lazily, he lifts into the air. And this time, he doesn't follow anything. No trail, no goddess, no desire. He simply flies. You follow, rising with him higher now over the tops of the olive trees, over the sleepy vineyards, where the boy still dreams under fig leaves, past the garden, now glowing in morning light. The whole world seems quieter than before, like even the land itself is exhaling. And then, below a flash of white, you both see it. A second goose, smaller, sleeker, skimming the river that cuts through the valley like a silver ribbon. It flies without urgency, wings slicing the mist cleanly. It doesn't look back. Zeus watches, doesn't chase, doesn't call. He just tilts slightly in the air, allowing a current to lift him higher, as if agreeing finally that some flights are meant to be admired from a distance. Now, your quirky tidbit on an old coin from Smyrna. There's a depiction of two geese flying in opposite directions, a thunderbolt between them. The meaning lost to time. But it was found buried with a priestess of Nemesis. Make of that what you will. You and Zeus climb above the clouds, now the air cooler, the sky stretching impossibly wide. And with every flap of his wings, his glow returns, not bright like before, not showy, but soft, earned. And here's your scholarly debate. Some philosophers argued that gods, when they behaved most ungodlike, revealed their truest natures, not in wrath or conquest, but in stillness, in confusion, in choosing to not act. Perhaps that's what Nemesis wanted all along. The world below spins slowly. Mortals begin to stir. The olives ripen, the fountains murmur, and the goose god flies on not after, but simply forward. Clouds drift beneath your feet, like lazy thoughts barely brushing the feathered wingtips of Zeus as he glides onward, unhurried, untethered, and finally unbothered. You rise alongside him into a realm where even the gods rarely linger, the air so thin and bright it feels like you're flying through music. He doesn't speak, of course. Geese rarely do in complete sentences. But there's something new in his movement, a kind of calm, like the chase left him lighter somehow. He's not looking for Nemesis anymore. He's not looking at all. He's just flying, and that might be the most divine thing he's done all night. Below the Aegean Sea, shimmers awake the wind smoothing its surface like fingers over silk. Small boats bob lazily their sails, catching the first full breath of morning. Fishermen rise blinking toward the sun, utterly unaware that a myth is drifting silently above their heads in goose form. Now, here's your historical fact. In the ancient world, the Aegean wasn't just water, it was memory, a story keeper. Each island a page, each harbor a footnote. Poets swore that the sea held songs beneath its waves, and if you were quiet enough or unlucky enough, you'd hear the ones meant for you. Zeus dips lower, skimming the edge of a breeze that carries salt thyme and something warm baking bread from a coastal village, perhaps, or the faint smoke of morning hearths. It's a scent not meant for gods. But he breathes it in anyway. He banks gently west over an island that once hosted a temple to Hera. You glance sideways, curious if he'll flinch. He doesn't. Instead, he circles slowly above a cluster of ruins, old columns, half swallowed by ivy, with goats lounging sleepily in the shade. No thunderclouds form, no passive-aggressive lightning bolts shoot from the sky. Just one slow lap, a nod of wings, and then onward. You catch up as he levels out, and that's when it happens. A shimmering pulse, subtle but unmistakable. The kind of pulse gods use when they're about to shift form. It doesn't come all at once. Not with Zeus. It happens feather by feather, breath by breath. His shape begins to lengthen, mid-air glows sharpening. Wings stretch wider, but also thinner, more human. The beak retreats, eyes darken, and for a moment, just a blink, he is both bird and god, at once suspended in a shimmer of becoming. And then he's Zeus again, not a bolt-wielding icon on a throne, not a cartoonish romantic with feathers, but simply a man in the sky. Cloak, fluttering hair loose in the wind expression, unreadable. You drift silently beside him. He notices you now, really sees you. His gaze is steady, not proud, not humbled, just present. And for a moment longer than myth usually allows, he flies alongside you like a fellow traveler. Now, for your quirky tidbit, in a rare mystery cult on the island of Paros initiates, would release geese into the sea and then swim after them. The goal was not to catch them, but to see how far you'd follow before you gave up. It was called the trial of letting go. Only a handful ever completed it. Most just treaded water and laughed. You suspect Zeus might have failed the test once, or perhaps he just passed it now. He begins to descend, not falling, not retreating, just easing downward back toward the mortal realm. You follow coasting through golden sunlight, the air rich with salt and story. The ground approaches slowly, a quiet shoreline, a grove of pines, and a stone path winding through tall grass. Not a temple, not a palace, just a clearing beside a stream. He lands. You hover above. As his sandals touch the earth, the last hint of feathers fading from his shoulders. He straightens, stretches, and exhales. No thunder, no flare, just breath. Now for your scholarly debate. Was the transformation symbolic, a divine moment of clarity, or just a theatrical trick to end a story gracefully? Some say this myth is about boundaries, chasing yes, but also stopping. Others say it was written for laughter and accidentally wandered into wisdom. Either way, the goose is gone, and Zeus is walking, not toward anything, just forward. The clearing Zeus has chosen to descend into is nothing special, no altar stones, no incense. Heavy shrines, no statues in his likeness, just tall grass bending in the wind, a small stream threading its way through smooth pebbles and pine trees, whispering softly above, as if trying not to disturb the stillness. He walks slowly now, barefoot, the hem of his robe trailing through morning dew. You follow at a respectful distance, noting how different he looks in the light. Less king, more traveler, less thunderbolt, more shadow and breath. He stops at the stream and crouches, cupping water in his hands. It spills through his fingers before he drinks. No divine ritual, no sacred pronouncement, just thirst. Here's your historical fact for the day, water. In Greek religion was deeply symbolic, used in purification rituals, offerings, and even as a medium for divination. Priests would sometimes read ripples like oracles, and certain springs were believed to hold memories, allowing the drinker to recall past lives or forget this one. Zeus seems to want neither. He splashes his face and looks up at the pines. A few birds flit overhead. One, a dove, maybe lands briefly on a branch, regards him and flies off. A subtle nod from the natural world you're allowed here. And for the first time since the chase began, you notice something missing. The tension. There's no expectation now, no need to impress, to pursue, to perform, no nemesis on the horizon, no plan to spin this into glory. Just a man drying his hands on the grass, looking mildly bewildered at the sensation of stillness. You settle beside the stream. The air is filled with that quiet kind of sound, the buzz of insects, the trickle of water, the breeze curling through pine needles. It's the kind of place mortals might stumble into and never realize they'd shared it with a god. Now, for your quirky tidbit, a 3rd century BCE philosopher named Hermenax proposed that the gods occasionally lost fragments of themselves, like forgetting a name or misplacing a thought. He called these divine echoes, and he believed places like this clearing were where those echoes went to rest, where even immortals could forget what they were for a while. Zeus lies back in the grass. He doesn't close his eyes. Not yet. He stares upward, watching a cloud drift across the sky in the vague shape of a horse, or maybe a lyre, or perhaps a goose. You can't quite tell. He lifts one arm and slowly, without drama, gestures toward the sky. Not commanding, not conjuring, just acknowledging, as if to say, yes, I remember. You hover above as the wind picks up again, stirring the leaves. A pine cone drops nearby with a soft thud. Zeus doesn't flinch. The cloud continues its lazy path. Now, for your scholarly debate, was this the end of the myth or just the middle? Some versions claim this pause in the story was followed by an entirely new pursuit, Leda, as many know. But others argue this particular tale was meant to show something rare, a god not getting what he wants, and realizing that might be a good thing. You feel it too. That soft shift in the current of the tale, the way stories settle when no one's trying to direct them, the way even a goose, chase properly wandered, can end in silence and grass and the absence of pursuit. Zeus exhales again. Still no lightning, still no feathers, just a breeze, a god, and the gentle hush of a stream that has never seen Olympus and doesn't care to. The hours roll on quietly, as though time itself has stepped barefoot into the stream and decided to linger a while. You remain near Zeus in the pine-shaded clearing, both of you suspended in the kind of stillness that feels thick, almost sacred, not with grandeur, but with calm. Zeus, arms folded behind his head, stares up into the branches above, occasionally blinking at the light filtering through the needles. Sunbeams dapple his robes. A beetle trudges valiantly across his sandal. He does not move. Eventually, he speaks just one word. Enough, you're not sure who it's for. You Nemesis himself, or maybe all of Olympus at once. Now here's your historical fact. In certain Orphic traditions, there was a belief that the gods went through cycles of transformation and retreat periods where they abandoned their divine personas and wandered the world learning humility by living among mortals. Most of those stories were lost, but some suggest that these divine pauses were what allowed fate to rebalance. The gods resting meant the world could breathe. Zeus sits up slowly. His hands are still wet from the stream. He looks at them, palms open, as though he expects to see thunderbolts still there. But of course there's nothing. Just skin, just water. He rubs his face. A low groan, not dramatic, just deeply tired, slips out. And then from across the clearing comes a soft rustling. You turn before he does. It's a goose. An actual one this time. Small, mottled, suspicious of everything. It pecks at the edge of the grass, fluffs its feathers, and stares at Zeus with the precise expression of someone who's very aware of the irony. Zeus stares back, unreadable. The goose honks once, firmly, as if to say, I've heard. Zeus nods. You're witnessing something oddly profound here. A moment where a god having embodied a creature is now regarded by that creature as an equal, not a symbol, not a joke, just another wanderer with complicated feelings and poor timing. Here's your quirky tidbit in a collection of rural proverbs carved into a temple column in Delphi. There's a line that reads, "He who chases with feathers finds silence in the pond." No one's entirely sure what it means. Some say it's about geese. Others believe it's a veiled insult about failed seduction. Still others think it refers to divine reflection. Today, you're inclined to believe all three are true. Zeus watches the goose waddle off toward the trees. He doesn't follow, just smiles a small private curve of the mouth, and then stands brushing leaves from his robe. He walks back toward the stream, this time not to drink, but to follow its path, slowly, hands behind his back, as if strolling through his own thoughts. You glide beside him, the soft murmur of water your only soundtrack. And now comes your scholarly debate moment. Some versions of this myth claim that Zeus, after failing to capture Nemesis, was mocked by the other gods, especially Hermes, who reportedly composed a ballad titled "The Honk That Shook Olympus." Others suggest this entire episode was never meant to be shared, that it was a secret story passed only between oracles and whispered to those who'd lost something important. But the version you're in now doesn't end with shame or song. It just continues softly, as all the best lessons do. Zeus kneels at a bend in the stream and runs his hand through the current. The water curls around his fingers like it remembers him. or maybe it doesn't. He looks up at you, not surprised you're still here. Let's walk, he says, not as a command, not as a request, just an offering. And so you do. You and the god who once turned into a goose, who chased a goddess across half the world, who forgot why halfway through, and who now walks beside a stream that doesn't care who he is. The trees sway gently, the sun climbs higher, and the story yours, his, and everyone's keeps flowing. The stream winds its way through tall reeds and over smooth stones, threading between pine roots, like it's weaving a story that only the earth will hear. Zeus walks beside it, each step unhurried. You drift at his shoulder, the rhythm of your movement, matching his not because he leads, but because there's something reassuring about walking alongside someone who's finally stopped trying to be impressive. The trees begin to thin. The pine forest gives way to rolling hills patched with wild thyme, yellow broom flowers, and scatterings of pale rocks, sun-bleached and shaped like sleeping animals. Far in the distance, a shepherd hums a tune to his goats. You hear it float on the breeze off-key, but content. Zeus listens too. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. The hum says more than thunder ever could. Now here's your historical fact. In Hellenic culture, goats were often sacred animals, symbols of both mischief and sustenance. Pan, the god of wild places and sudden fear, was part goat. His panpipes, supposedly crafted from reeds beside a river just like this, were used in lullabies and omens alike. And while Zeus would never admit it publicly, it's said that Pan once made him laugh so hard he cried, a rare feat among immortals. You catch Zeus smiling faintly as the goat song drifts away. Then a stone path appears half buried in grass, a forgotten road, the kind mortals once used when they believed more readily in the gods walking beside them. Zeus hesitates. He crouches, brushing away dirt with his hand. The path bears faint markings. Worn sandals wheels the grooves of something old, moving toward something older. He looks up, not at you, but beyond, toward a distant ridge where a single cypress tree leans westward as if caught mid-bough. The shape of it stirs something in him. Not memory exactly, just recognition. And here's your quirky tidbit. In some rural villages of Crete, there's an old belief that trees which lean without growing crooked are bowing trees, guardians of stories buried beneath them. If the tree faces west, it guards a tale of sorrow. If east, a tale of laughter. This one faces west. Zeus follows the path toward it. You trail behind. As he walks, you realize something odd. The further he moves, the less divine he looks. Not smaller, not dimmer, but more tangible, less marble statue, more weathered traveler, like he's shedding layers of story with each step. He reaches the tree and rests his palm against its bark. The cypress doesn't react. It doesn't have to. It's been standing longer than most temples, and it's listened to more secrets than any oracle. Zeus leans against it and exhales. I think I'll sit here, he says quietly. He does, now comes. Your scholarly debate, was Zeus meant to rest here? Some say the tree marks a mythical crossroads where gods could become mortal, temporarily to escape the noise of Olympus. Others claim it's just a storyteller's flourish, an invented symbol that lets us imagine that even the divine crave pause. Either way, you understand. This isn't defeat. It's not exile. It's something rarer choice. Zeus tilts his head back against the trunk. Above him, the branches sway, casting dappled shadows across his face. "You're still here," he murmurs to you. "I thought maybe you'd follow her." You shake your head, silently. He nods. "Me too." And that might be the closest he's ever come to admitting. He let go. The breeze picks up. A single pine cone drapes at his feet. He taps it with one toe, rolls it gently, and then in a voice so soft, the wind nearly takes it, he says, "Tell this part quietly." So you will. No horns, no heroes, just a god under a tree, finally resting while the world spins on without needing him to chase it. Zeus sits still under the bowed cypress, one hand resting in the grass, the other absently turning that pine cone over and over in his palm like a meditation stone. You hover close, not out of obligation, but because silence like this is rare even for gods, especially for gods. A cicada buzzes nearby. The wind rustles the high branches, and somewhere beyond the ridge, you hear the soft clink of a goat bell barely there. For a while, Zeus says nothing. Then, you know the funny thing about power, he doesn't wait for a reply. It never actually leaves you. Even when you stop using it, it just waits. Like thunder in your throat, you glance at the sky, clear, soft blue, with a single cloud drifting lazily west. No storm today, just weather. That rarest thing in a god's life, ordinary. Now here's your historical fact. Ancient Greeks believed that true power didn't come from displays of force, but from restraint. Sophrosine was the term, a kind of dignified self-control balance, even moderation. Heroes who mastered it were often more respected than those who simply fought well. Gods, of course, struggled with it, Zeus in particular. Except perhaps today, you and he watch the valley together. A shepherd leads his flock through the distant olive groves. A child runs ahead, chasing nothing in particular. There's no sign of Nemesis, but her presence oddly still lingers, not as a shadow, but as a balance, a counterweight to everything Zeus once tried to force. He shifts slightly, stretching one leg. You ever notice how chasing something too hard makes it smaller, he says. Even love. Especially love. It's the kind of line that would have earned him a statue in some city-state had he said it aloud in public. But here, under the tree, it's just a sigh. Here's your quirky tidbit on the island of Delos. There's a ruined terrace known only by locals as the waiting place. Nobody remembers what it was originally built for, but the stones are worn smooth in a wide circle, as if people gods or stories just sat there doing nothing. According to local legend, if you sit there long enough, a truth will find you, whether or not you want it. Zeus shifts again. I used to think wanting something was enough, he murmurs. That if I just became more radiant, more terrifying, more persuasive, it would always come to me. He tosses the pine cone lightly. It lands in the grass and rolls to a stop. But sometimes the chase is the problem. He leans back again, eyes closed now. You see it in his posture, not weariness, not regret, but a kind of emotional exhale, the way a story feels when it stops needing to go anywhere. And now for your scholarly debate moment. Some mythographers argue that Zeus's pursuit of Nemesis was never about desire at all, but about control, about refusing to accept a no from a fellow divine. Others interpret it through a seasonal lens, Nemesis as spring Zeus, as winter the goose, as a symbol of change. Still others say this myth wasn't about love or punishment, but about what happens when even the king of gods has to face the limits of his reach. Whatever version you believe the story isn't loud anymore. It doesn't want to be. Zeus opens one eye, looks at you. She's probably halfway to the Black Sea by now. You nod. She'll never stop moving. You nod again. And then, for the first time since the feathers fell away, he laughs. Quietly. Genuinely. Not the kind of laugh that comes from mocking others, but the kind that bubbles up when you finally understand your own foolishness. A laugh born of finally letting something go. The pine tree rustles above you. One more cone falls. Zeus doesn't move this time. He just watches it land. And in that quiet, you realize this is the ending. Not a triumphant one, not a tragic one, just an honest one, a god, a field. A long walk turns still, and finally no chase. The sun creeps higher now, warming the hillside, where Zeus rests beneath the leaning cypress. The grass has dried, and the dew that once sparkled like tiny stars is gone. The world has shifted into its daytime rhythm bees, weaving lazy patterns through the wildflowers, a lark trilling somewhere overhead, and the soft rustle of distant farmhands beginning their work. And yet the god beside you remains still, not asleep, not meditating, just present. Mortals always think immortality means motion. Zeus says suddenly, like we're always flying, always striking, always meddling, but that's only because they rarely catch us when we're sitting still. You can't help but smile, it's true. In the epics, the gods are always doing plotting, interfering, appearing in dreams, or transforming into animals. Never simply being. But here he is. And here you are. Now here's your historical fact. The Greeks didn't have a single word for doing nothing in the way we think of it today. They had skol, a kind of peaceful leisure that wasn't laziness but contemplation. A space for thought conversation, maybe music or sunlight. It was considered the ideal state of the free citizen, and arguably of the god who had already done enough. Zeus reaches into the grass beside him and pulls up a stalk of dry wheat. He twirls it between his fingers. You watch the movement slow and rhythmic, like something remembered from centuries ago, before thunderbolts, before temples, before even Olympus was Olympus. And then in the far sky, a small dot appears. It grows slowly. You both squint up. A bird. No, not just any bird, a goose. Unremarkable, small. Its flight pattern uneven, almost comically so. It flaps and glides and flaps again, clearly not built for grandeur. Zeus follows its path with his eyes. Doesn't move, doesn't react. The goose passes overhead without pausing, just a line across the sky, a punctuation mark with wings. You both watch it fade into the haze. Here's your quirky tidbit. In Boeotia, old farmers used to say that when a goose flew directly over your head without honking, it meant someone had learned a lesson. Not necessarily you, just someone. The bird carried it away, a feathered message to the sky. The higher it flew, the further the lesson would spread. Zeus nods. I wonder if it's her, he says. Or just a goose. You shrug. Same thing, really. You both laugh this time. Now for your scholarly debate. Was the goose simply a vessel, a metaphor, or was it literal? Did Zeus truly transform? Did Nemesis actually run? Or is this all the kind of tale meant not to be believed, but remembered, retold to children as they fall asleep, so that they learn that even gods can be ridiculous, and that sometimes the wisest course is to stop flying after something that clearly doesn't want to be caught? Zeus stands, slowly, dusts himself off. He looks around, not as if searching for anything, but as if seeing the space again for what it is. Not a stage, not a battlefield, just a place. A moment in the world that doesn't care whether it's being witnessed by a mortal, a goose, or a god. And then he walks, away from the cypress, away from the ridge, not toward Olympus, not toward glory, just walking. You follow. The path isn't paved, it's barely there at all. Just a faint groove through time and old clover, a trail that hasn't been used in ages. But he finds it anyway, the way all wanderers do. And that's when you realize this is no longer a story about Zeus chasing anyone. This is a story about him walking back to himself. The trail winds downward now, tracing the soft contour of the hillside like a forgotten line of poetry. Each step presses the scent of crushed time into the warm air. Zeus walks ahead of you, not hurriedly, not aimlessly, but with the relaxed cadence of someone finally unburdened from his own expectations. He doesn't look back. He doesn't need to. The path narrows as it curves around a cluster of laurel trees, ancient gnarled things that bend toward the light, like old poets searching for one last metaphor. Their leaves rustle as you pass, and for a moment you wonder if they recognize him. The gods leave long shadows even when they try not to. Now here's your historical fact. Laurel trees sacred to Apollo were often planted near places of divine revelation. In myth, they were believed to murmur truths when the wind passed through them, quiet messages only the attentive could hear. Priests would sleep beneath them before delivering oracles. Others came simply to listen. Zeus pauses under one of them, hand grazing the bark. He listens too, not like a god waiting for prophecy, like a man letting the wind speak freely without needing to answer. Then from farther down the trail comes the scent of smoke, not acrid or alarming, warm, woody. Someone is cooking, bread maybe, lentils, rosemary, the scent of a hearth. You both follow it. Soon you reach a small stone farmhouse tucked into the curve of a low hill, half swallowed by vines and thyme. An olive tree stands watch out front, its roots bulging from the earth like tired knuckles. A woman in a faded tunic kneels near the doorway, spreading herbs on a drying cloth. She looks up and sees him. No panic, no awe, just a long, thoughtful gaze, the kind one gives a traveler they recognize from a dream they forgot they had. Zeus inclines his head. She nods. Without a word, she rises, brushes off her knees, and disappears inside. A few moments later, she returns with a clay bowl and sets it on a flat stone near the path. A peace offering, or maybe breakfast. She doesn't wait for thanks. Just returns to her herbs, humming something low and familiar. Zeus sits, breaks a piece of flatbread in half, dips it into the bowl olive oil, beans, garlic, lemon. He eats slowly the way someone eats when they've forgotten they're important. Here's your quirky tidbit in rural Attica. There's an old superstition that if you feed a stranger in silence and they leave behind a coin, it means you fed a god. If they leave behind nothing, it means you fed someone who needed it more than you. Either way, you are blessed. Zeus finishes. He sets the bowl aside. Leaves no coin, just a small laurel sprig placed carefully on the stone. And now your scholarly debate: was this part of the myth recorded anywhere? This farmhouse, this quiet breakfast, this moment of unspoken recognition, most say no. But a few obscure texts, mostly marginalia, suggest that the gods occasionally returned to the mortal world, not to rule, but to remember. Not as punishment, not as trial, just to feel what silence feels like again. You both stand. The woman never looks up. The gods don't always need acknowledgement. Sometimes they just need stillness and someone willing to let them have it. Zeus continues down the trail. No lightning, no echoing name in the sky, no swan, no goose, just footprints in the dust. You follow past the olive tree, past the fading hum of rosemary and ash, toward a bend in the trail that leads nowhere so famous, and for that reason feels exactly right. The path winds gently now, no longer climbing or descending, just meandering like a stream, content to go nowhere in particular. The sun is soft on your shoulders, filtered through late morning haze. Zeus walks a few steps ahead, hands clasped behind his back, head tilted as if listening to a song only the breeze remembers. There's no rush. There hasn't been for a while. You pass a stone wall half collapsed and wrapped in honeysuckle. Bees hum lazily over yellow blossoms. Time is not quite standing still, but it's certainly stopped looking at its watch. Zeus pauses. There's a small tree growing at the side of the path. Not ancient, not sacred, just a young fig, no taller than a man with a few early fruits starting to ripen. He plucks one, gently rolls it in his palm. Now here's your historical fact. Figs were considered one of the oldest cultivated crops in the Mediterranean. Theophrastus wrote of them as a fruit of memory. In rituals, they were offered to Dionysus and Demeter, symbols of sweetness, fertility, and the quiet gift of enough. Not abundance, not luxury, enough. Zeus bites into the fig. Juice runs over his fingers. He doesn't mind. He chews slowly, thoughtfully. You know, he says between bites, sometimes I wonder if the poets got it all wrong. Maybe we weren't supposed to be admired. Maybe we were just supposed to be remembered. You consider this. And here's your quirky tidbit. A rare bronze votive plaque found in a well near Argos depicts a goose perched atop a fig tree. No inscription, no temple link, just that odd pairing, The archaeologists who cataloged it titled it simply Reversal. Zeus finishes the fig and flicks the stem into the underbrush, not carelessly, just with the certainty that everything returns to the soil eventually, even stories. He steps off the path for a moment and kneels at the base of the fig tree, not to pray, to dig. With his bare hands, he moves a little soil, pats it, and gently presses a fig seed into the earth. You watch in silence. He covers it, presses once, stands. Maybe that one will grow better, he says. Not to you, not really. And now comes your scholarly debate moment. Was Zeus changed by this myth or simply interrupted? Some say divine personalities can't evolve, that they're archetypes, not people. Others argue that myths like this are less about gods and more about us. Our need to imagine that even power itself can learn pause and plant something quietly in the ground. You drift closer as he brushes his hands off. The trail forks just ahead. One side curves back toward the coastline. The other disappears into a grove of poplars, their white bark shimmering like moonlight, even in full day. Neither seems more important than the other. Zeus stands at the fork. Then, with a shrug, as quiet as a falling petal, he takes the grove path. You follow, of course, because at this point it doesn't matter where he's going. Only that he's walking, and that for once he's not looking back. The grove of poplars welcomes you both in silence, their pale trunks rising like soft pillars in a temple with no roof. Sunlight trickles through the fluttering leaves above, casting silvery light that dances across the path like quiet ripples on a lake. The air is cooler here, fragrant with moss and something faintly sweet, perhaps old sap or the memory of rain. Zeus walks slower now, not because he's tired, but because this place demands stillness, and he's finally learned how to give it. Poplars, you recall, were associated with the underworld in Greek thought, not in the ominous sense, but as trees of reflection, of pause. Their whispering leaves were said to carry the voices of the dead, or sometimes just the echo of things not yet understood. Fitting, you think, for a god who's been flying, chasing, crashing, and now wandering. Here's your historical fact. In the Eleusinian mysteries, poplars were planted near sacred wells where initiates would sit in contemplation before being led into ritual spaces. The trees were not worshipped, but they were respected. They didn't provide fruit. They weren't strong enough for temples. They simply stood and listened. Zeus stops beside one particularly wide trunk, places a hand on the bark. He doesn't close his eyes. He just stands there, breathing, listening. Then softly, "She never ran from me because she feared me." He glances toward you. "She ran because I wouldn't stop." It's not an apology exactly. It's more dangerous than that. It's understanding. He pulls his hand away, brushes past the tree, and continues. You follow the trail as it curves downward, deeper into the grove. The ground here is soft, springy, with decades of fallen leaves. Birds rustle unseen in the canopy. Somewhere far off, you hear water again, a river maybe, or the sea reclaiming the mouth of a stream. Zeus kneels once more, not to plant something this time, but to pick something up. A feather, white, perfect. It catches the sun just so. He turns it slowly between his fingers, you both remember. Now comes your quirky tidbit in a lost comic fragment. By the playwright Epicharmus, a god, presumably Zeus, is heckled by a chorus of geese who sing a mocking ode titled Feathers of Regret. The joke, it seems, was that the god had lost all his powers but gained better manners. The chorus ends with the line, "What flies away may still teach us how to land." Zeus tucks the feather into his belt. You drift alongside him as the trees thin, the light brightens, and the sky widens above. Now comes your scholarly debate. Was the feather a symbol of failure or transformation? Some versions of the myth end with Zeus regaining his full power and returning to Olympus unchanged and unbothered. Others, rarer, speak of him walking the earth in different shapes for years, never chasing, just watching, as if trying to understand the world in its quiet form, not its theatrical one. The grove ends at a low rise. You both climb it. At the top, the sea, a brilliant blue plain stretching endlessly to the horizon, waves rolling in lazy rhythm, sunlight glittering on the surface like a language only the gods once spoke. Zeus exhales, a soft sound, not dramatic, just the sound of someone who remembers what it's like to stand still at the edge of something vast and not want to command it. He removes the feather from his belt, holds it up. Then, with no ceremony, he lets it go. The breeze catches it, carries it gently out over the sea where it tumbles, dances, and finally vanishes into the horizon. No thunder, no omen, just one god on one quiet hill watching something he no longer needs drift away. The sea stretches before you like the smoothest of mirrors, only the softest waves breaking its perfect blue. Below the rise, the coast curves inward, gently forming a quiet cove, cradled by time and salt. A few gulls wheel lazily overhead, their cries distant, echoing across the open sky like old gossip. Zeus stands at the edge, the last of the poplars behind him, the world open in every direction ahead. He doesn't speak, not yet. He just breathes in that sea air rich with brine memory and the distant laughter of mortals. It's a view that's greeted countless travelers, countless gods, countless endings that felt like beginnings. You watch as he sits, legs folded beneath him, hands on his knees, the same way he might have once sat on a mountaintop before shaping the weather with a flick of his wrist. But today, the only thing he's commanding is his own stillness. Now for your historical fact. In many Greek myths, the sea was not merely a place, it was a character. Alive, conscious. Poseidon ruled it, yes, but the sea itself was older, deeper, and far less predictable than any god. Sailors poured wine into it, whispered into it, feared it, and in return it held their secrets. Zeus picks up a smooth pebble, turns it over once, then twice, then gently tosses it into the waves. It skips once, twice, sinks, no splash, no divine ripples, just a pebble becoming part of the sea's story. You drift beside him as he watches it disappear. Here's your quirky tidbit. There's a fragment of a Thessalian lullaby that mothers once sang to children who had nightmares. The final line, translated roughly, is "Even gods must rest their wings, and stones must sleep in the sea." Scholars believe it's a remnant from a forgotten myth, a story where Zeus, weary from transformation, gave his strength to the sea for safekeeping. You wonder if that's what this moment is. Then Zeus speaks. I've spent lifetimes being large, he says quietly. Larger than armies, larger than storms, always rising, always towering. He leans forward, digs his fingers into the sand. But no one ever tells you how heavy it is to be seen like that and all the time. He picks up a second pebble, doesn't throw it, just holds it. You chase, and sometimes you forget what you were trying to hold. You nod, though he isn't really asking for agreement. He's just talking, like a man who hasn't had a real listener in centuries. He turns the pebble over again. She didn't run from me, he says, echoing the thought from the grove. She ran so I'd stop, so I'd feel the running. Not hers, mine. He places the pebble beside him, leaves it. Now comes your scholarly debate. Is this moment an epilogue or a midpoint? Zeus sitting alone by the sea, without glory, without conquest. Does it signal a changed God, or just a God pausing long enough to remember what change might feel like? Many versions of this story omit this part entirely. They cut from the chase to the next drama. They skip the silence. But perhaps that's the point. Perhaps the silence is what actually matters. Because here, by the sea, in the hum of sunlight and gulls and low waves, the thunder finally isn't. And neither of you misses it. Zeus lies back in the sand arms, spread wide, staring up at the sky. His breath rises and falls like the tide. And in that quiet rhythm, in that uncomplicated space, you see him not as a ruler or a shapeshifter or a chaser, but as someone who for the first time in a long time is simply still. No feathers, no pursuit, just a god on a shore. The sand conforms gently beneath Zeus's form, cradling him like the earth is grateful to hold him in a way that Olympus never quite managed. His arms are spread, one leg bent, slightly, eyes wide open, but unfocused, tracking clouds that drift like old thoughts above. You float just overhead, catching the breeze that brushes in from the sea, cool, salted whispering. For a long while, nothing happens. And it's perfect. Zeus eventually raises one arm, shielding his face from the sun. Not because it bothers him, it doesn't. He's a sunbather now, apparently. But because even gods need something to do with their hands when they're not commanding empires or chasing love in the form of poultry. Funny, he murmurs. I've started counting birds. I never used to notice them, and sure enough you see one now, a small gull gliding just offshore, tracing circles over a drifting fishing boat that bobs as though it were tied to a lullaby. It's not flashy, it's not important, it just is. Here's your historical fact in Homer's Odyssey. Birds were seen as omens, messengers of fate. An eagle carrying a dove meant a god's will was being done. But in later pastoral poetry, birds were simply part of the world background music to a slower, more thoughtful life. And poets began to envy them not for their wings, but for their freedom from stories. Zeus sits up. He stretches his back with a small, satisfied grunt. Not the groan of exhaustion, but the sigh of someone who's found a new kind of tiredness, peaceful tired. He glances your way. I don't think I miss Olympus, he says. Not today. And here's your quirky tidbit. A minor cult on the island of Thasos once worshipped a version of Zeus known as Zeus Kataskawastes, Zeus the Builder. He wasn't prayed to for storms or justice, but for patience, for stonework that wouldn't collapse, for walls that held, for paths that led somewhere gently. Some argue it was the same Zeus. Others say it was just a way to make a too big god feel closer to home. Zeus now stands brushing sand from his robes. He walks toward the edge of the water, letting the waves lap at his ankles. He wiggles his toes into the wet sand like a child rediscovering texture. There's no storm in him, not even a breeze, just the slow breathing of tide and time. Now comes your scholarly debate. Did the ancients ever want their gods to be like this? Quiet, gentle, tired? Or was this version of Zeus whispered only in the margins, between the thunderous epics and golden statues, a bedtime god, not a battlefield one? You suspect that both are true, that even in antiquity someone somewhere needed to believe that the king of Olympus once stood in the sea alone, with nothing to prove and no one to conquer, just standing. Zeus closes his eyes. You hover close, not to protect, not to record, just to witness. The sun continues its slow arc overhead. The gulls glide. The water shines. And for the second time in this long, peculiar story, Zeus doesn't do anything at all. He simply lets the world continue, without interruption, without pursuit, without a single feather out of place. Zeus stands in the shallows, the sea curling gently around his ankles, like it remembers him softly, hesitantly, the way an old friend might reach out after centuries apart. He doesn't wade in farther. He doesn't test the depth, or summon dolphins, or split the waves for dramatic effect. He just stands there, eyes closed, letting the tide come and go. You float beside him in the salted stillness, and for a moment there is no mythology, no thunder, no geese, no chase, only breath, only rhythm. The sound of the water, the wind, the birds overhead, it all melts into something more elemental, the background music of the world itself. Now here's your historical fact. In early Greek religion, Thalassa, the sea was sometimes seen as a goddess of her own, not like Poseidon, who ruled the sea, but like the sea's own memory, its own self, a feminine presence of patience, danger, and depth. She didn't shout, she whispered, and her power was in what she kept, not what she gave. Zeus opens his eyes and takes one step back onto the sand, not out of fear, just to anchor himself. He sits again, this time cross-legged at the water's edge, and begins drawing lazy circles in the sand with his finger. You watch them form, then dissolve under the waves. Again, again, as though he's writing something that only the sea is meant to read. And here's your quirky tidbit. In a nearly forgotten Peloponnesian tale, a village priest once claimed to have seen a god with a lion's beard sitting by the sea, drawing spirals in the sand. When asked what he was writing, the priest said the god replied, "Nothing that will last." That's the point. Zeus draws another spiral, doesn't look up. There's power in walking away, he murmurs. But there's peace in staying still, you nod, though you're not sure if he's talking to you, to Nemesis, or to the tide itself. Maybe all three. The sky begins to change. Afternoon light, tilting warmer shadows, stretching long across the sand, like old myths that no longer need to stand upright. And now comes your scholarly debate. Was this myth meant to end here, at the edge of things? Or was this simply the middle of a longer, slower tale, one with no climax, just gentle turning? Some say the story was always about the pursuit. Others argue it was about the transformation. But a few, a very quiet few, say it was about this moment. A god, a line of tide-washed spirals, and the decision to do nothing grand. Zeus lifts his hand, draws a final curve, then smooths it out. No one will know what he wrote. That's the beauty of it. You drift a little higher, watching as the waves continue their soft work. The tide has taken half the spirals already. The rest won't last another hour. But it doesn't matter. Zeus rises again, this time slowly, like someone who's rested, not just physically, but mythically. He brushes sand from his robes and looks out at the horizon, not as a destination, but as a companion, then faintly a honk. You turn. A goose, just one, flies low along the shore, flapping with the awkward rhythm of something that was never designed for elegance, but somehow achieves it anyway. Zeus watches it pass. He smiles, doesn't wave, doesn't chase, just watches. And the goose flies on toward the far curve of the coast, where the sea folds the sky into itself, and everything begins again. The goose disappears over the horizon, a small flapping punctuation mark on a sentence that doesn't need to be finished. Zeus watches it until it's a speck, then not even that, just a memory of movement against the sky. The sound of the wings lingers a little longer than the shape like echoes often do. He turns inland. The sea behind him is now just background, the way it was before all this started. Not a stage, not a mirror, just water doing what it's always done. You drift slightly lower, staying near him as he begins walking again, not along the shore, but away from it toward the hills that roll like folded parchment under a widening sky. The grass is dry and sun-bleached here. Cicadas chirr in invisible orchestras, and Zeus, he whistles, just once, no fanfare, just a low, tuneless note. He's not summoning anything. He's not trying to make a point. He's just filling the air. Because sometimes silence needs a companion. Now here's your historical fact. In rural Arcadia, whistling during the day was considered a way to wake the landscape, an offering to Pan or local nature spirits. It wasn't formal worship, just an acknowledgement. A hello to the trees, to the rocks, to the stories buried under every stone. Zeus kicks at a pebble, sends it skipping down the slope. You know, he says to no one in particular, I used to think being remembered was the most important thing. He glances at you, but I think being forgotten might be the greater kindness. You don't respond, not because you disagree, but because the statement doesn't ask for answers, just space. He kneels by a cluster of wildflowers, blue and white, growing stubbornly between cracks in the rocks. He runs his fingers across the petals, doesn't pluck them, just feels them. Here's your quirky tidbit. The Greeks had a word for certain wildflowers that grew without planting, tending, or permission, automelista. It meant those that grow by themselves. A handful of ancient writers believed these flowers were the physical traces of unrecorded acts of kindness, a mortal's moment of compassion too small for story left behind in blossom form. Zeus leans forward and breathes them in. No thunder, no transformation, just flowers. And now comes your scholarly debate. Were the myths of Zeus ever meant to allow for gentleness? Or is that something modern minds have wished it into them, hoping that even the loudest gods had soft centers? Some say this kind of storytelling is revisionist, too romantic, too quiet for the grandeur of Olympus. But others believe it's what myths were always for showing power, becoming wisdom. Zeus rises again. The hills stretch wide around you. There is no clear path, no destination, only direction. Forward. He walks slowly occasionally, stooping to touch a leaf, to look at a beetle, to listen for nothing at all. You realize he hasn't spoken Nemesis's name in hours, not because he's forgotten, but because he finally understands that he doesn't have to speak it to remember her. That's the last transformation, perhaps not the goose, not the man, not the pause, but this, the story continuing without the chase. The hills unfold before you in slow golden waves, their quiet undulations catching the light like warm fabric stretched across the bones of the earth. Zeus walks just ahead, his robe dusted with pollen and the burrs of low thistle. He doesn't brush them off. Letting things cling, it seems, has become part of the rhythm. You follow the scent of sun-heated herbs, oregano, wild marjoram, maybe a bit of mint. It's the smell of the Greek interior, clean, stubborn, ancient. Somewhere nearby, a cricket clicks an irregular beat, like a drummer who doesn't need an audience. Zeus bends to pick up a curved stick, idly tracing a line through the soil as he walks. A trail, maybe. A thought. Maybe nothing at all. Now here's your historical fact. In some agrarian festivals of the Hellenic calendar, plowing a single line through untouched earth was a symbolic act of renewal. Not to plant, just to draw. A reminder that movement alone could be sacred. Farmers would walk the perimeter of their fields in silence, asking the gods for nothing but continued rhythm. Zeus draws a loop, then another, lets the stick fall. He keeps walking. You float lower, nearly touching the earth now, as if you're becoming part of it. The story has sunk into the soil. Every step is less myth, more memory. At a fork between two goat paths, Zeus stops. He looks to his left. There, nestled into the hillside, is a small shrine. Weather-worn, overtaken by ivy, but still unmistakable. A single column, cracked but standing, a basin dry, and above the lintel, barely legible, an inscription worn by time nemesis. You hover still. Zeus doesn't flinch. He doesn't smile either. He just nods. There's no reverence, no dread, just familiarity. He walks to the altar and kneels, not dramatically, not ceremonially, just quietly, like someone revisiting a place, not to change anything, but to sit beside it. Here's your quirky tidbit among the lesser-known traditions. In Greek ritual, was silent tending a form of maintenance where no prayers were spoken aloud. The caretaker simply cleaned the altar left herbs and walked away. It was a gesture of respect for gods who preferred privacy or whose lessons had already been received. Zeus reaches into his robe and pulls out something small, a fig seed. He places it on the altar. No speech, no lightning, just a seed, a beginning from the middle of the story. And now comes your scholarly debate. Was this gesture part of the original myth cycle? There's no textual evidence, but several scholars point out inconsistencies in later vase paintings. Zeus depicted not in flight or pursuit, but beside a tree, a spring, or an altar, head bowed. The theory is simple. This wasn't part of the official myth, but a quieter version retold in households and hearths where the gods were not thunderous but thoughtful. Zeus stands. He doesn't wait for anything, doesn't expect Nemesis to appear, doesn't expect the earth to crack or the altar to glow. He simply turns and walks away. You glance once more at the seed. No one else will ever see it. That's how you know it was meant to be planted. Zeus moves on from the shrine without looking back. The seed rests quietly on the altar, a dot at the end of a sentence, whispered, not written. The path ahead curves again, leading you both into a shaded hollow where the light comes slanting in from the west, honey-colored and soft. The day is aging. Zeus walks slower now, but not out of weariness. His steps have taken on the calm weight of someone who has stopped measuring distance. You sense it too, that the story, like the sun, is beginning to lower itself, not ending, just settling. Now here's your historical fact. In many Greek tragedies, the last act wasn't about climax. It was about quiet. The emotional resolution didn't arrive with a scream, but a murmur. What mattered was not justice or vengeance, but balance restored, a kind of return to stillness. And often the gods who appeared at the end came not to interfere, but to observe. Zeus is observing now. He passes a grove of pomegranate trees, their fruit just beginning to swell, their blossoms curled like the lips of sleeping fire. He reaches up, fingers grazing one, but doesn't pluck it. It's not ready, he says simply. You smile. Here's your quirky tidbit in some rural myths, especially those passed between women. Pomegranates were considered mirrors of patience, a fruit that punished haste. Open one too early, and you'd be met with bitterness. Wait, and the sweetness would offer itself. Nemesis, in more than one version, was said to prefer them over any other fruit, not because of their beauty, but because of their timing. Zeus moves on. Birds start to quiet. Even the cicadas seem to soften. The world is preparing for dusk, and now comes your scholarly debate. Helen of Troy, famously born from an egg, is said to be the daughter of Zeus, and depending on the telling, either Nemesis or Leda. Most stories favor Leda and the swan, but the earlier fragments, some of them mention a goose, a long pursuit, and an egg left unguarded near a riverbank. Scholars argue over which version is truer, but perhaps that's the wrong question. Zeus reaches the crest of a small hill. Below, bathed in late sun, lies a simple farmstead, clay walls, thatched roof, two goats nosing around a fence. Smoke drifts upward from a cooking fire. He watches it quietly. "Would you look at that?" he murmurs. "No altars, no hymns, just soup." You drift beside him as he lowers himself to the grass. He doesn't knock, doesn't descend, just watches from afar, the way gods sometimes do when they no longer need to be involved. The farm dog barks once. A child laughs. A wooden spoon clatters inside a clay bowl. Zeus closes his eyes, not to sleep, just to feel. And maybe, just maybe, so does the world. Here in this golden hour, where every story slows and softens, you understand something unspoken. This isn't the tale of how Helen was born. It's not the tale of thunder or swans or vengeance. It's the story before the story, the one where a god learns what not to reach for, the one where the chase ends in stillness, and the egg, the myth, the war that follows, is not the point. The point is this: a quiet hill, an unpicked fruit, and a god who finally lets something go. Evening unfurls across the land like a well-worn shawl draping hills and trees in softness. The light loses its edge, colors deepen, the sounds of the world begin to hush, not disappear but soften, like someone lowering the volume to help a friend sleep. Zeus remains seated on the hillside, arms resting on his knees. He doesn't move much now. The wind combs through his hair, and every so often he opens his eyes not to look at anything, but to stay present with the quiet. You remain with him not out of duty, but because this moment feels like something you'd miss if you blinked. Below, the small farm carries on. A woman calls in her goats. Someone slices bread. A child hums to a doll made of rags and straw. It's the kind of life that the myths rarely mention, but maybe it's the only one that ever really mattered. Now here's your historical fact. The ancients often spoke of heroic stillness, not in the sense of battle, but in the aftermath when the hero, having fought and returned, simply sat beneath a tree or by a fire and rested. These scenes rarely made it onto vases or into epic verses, but in smaller, more human poems, the ones blows scratched into walls or recited at dusk, they appear again and again. A warrior, a fire, a sigh. Zeus sighs now, not regretfully, just deeply. You know, he says, no one ever carved a temple to me for not doing something. He chuckles softly. Maybe they should have. You chuckle too. He plucks a blade of dry grass, folds it, unfolds it. A small gesture, nothing divine about it. Just the sort of thing a person does when they're sitting with a story they're not ready to finish. Here's your quirky tidbit. A few surviving inscriptions from sanctuary ruins in Thessaly reference offerings not of gold or oil, but of silence. For the god who listens is carved in small tight script on a stone now kept in a museum's back room, rarely seen. Some think it refers to Hades. Others believe it was for Zeus during the years he wandered quiet, gooseless, unthroned. You're beginning to believe it too. Now comes your scholarly debate. If this version of Zeus had taken root in the popular myths, what would have changed? Would the Iliad still have happened? Would Helen still have sailed, or would the world have quietly rewritten itself with gods who learned to sit beside altars rather than demand from them. It's tempting to imagine, but then again, myths weren't designed to record what could have been. They were there to remind us of what we keep forgetting, that even the most powerful must one day stop moving, stop shouting, stop chasing, and simply sit down. Zeus leans back on his elbows, watching the stars begin to prick holes in the sky. The first one appears, then another, then another. Even she, he says at last, must be watching the same sky. He doesn't say her name. He doesn't need to. Because at this point in the story, Nemesis isn't a person to be reached. She's a direction, a lesson, a horizon, and she's already here in the silence he finally allowed. Night folds gently over the land, cool and blue and full of hush. The crickets begin their steady chorus again, no longer scattered or lazy, but purposeful, an orchestra tuned to the rhythms of darkness. The last streaks of orange fade from the sky, and the stars arrive in proper clusters, drawing quiet maps above the hills. Zeus lies back in the grass, now arms folded behind his head. His silhouette is still broad, still unmistakably divine. But there's something smaller about him too, not diminished, just closer. You float beside him, barely moving. He says nothing for a while, just watches the constellations appear one by one, as if he were a child again, trying to name them all before sleep. Now, here's your historical fact. The ancient Greeks didn't just look to the stars for navigation or myth, they believed in the influence of constellations, not just in astrology, but in memory. To see Orion was to remember the hunter, to see Cygnus. The swan was to recall grace and grief. The sky wasn't a map, it was a library. Zeus points lazily at a cluster overhead. Look, he says, Cygnus. You nod. The stars of the swan stretch across the sky, elegant and a little lonely. Some say it's Orpheus reborn. Others say it's just the ghost of a bird who once mattered to a god with too many feelings. Zeus squints. Do you think they ever wrote me up there? You shrug. Maybe they did. Maybe they didn't. But you suspect the more important question is, would it matter if they hadn't? Here's your quirky tidbit. An ancient folk belief in Euboea held that stars only remained in the sky if someone down below still remembered the story attached to them. If forgotten, the star would fall not out of punishment, but out of gentle resignation. They didn't burn out. They simply let go. Zeus watches Cygnus, then Pegasus, then a sliver of Ursa Minor, barely visible behind a drifting veil of cloud. I used to think that being remembered meant being right, he says, that the story had to go my way to be worth telling. He pauses. But I was wrong, wasn't I? You don't answer, because the moment is doing all the speaking. Now comes your scholarly debate. Was this perhaps the final form of the myth? Zeus not as the ruler, the chaser, or even the lesson, but as the listener, a rare glimpse of a god, not shaping the world, but shaped by it. Some argue this version is too soft, too human, but maybe that's exactly what's missing from the archives. The idea that even gods can watch the sky and wonder what stories will outlast them. Zeus shifts, folds one arm across his chest. His breathing slows. The grass bends beneath him gently. The wind has gone still. You sense it, He's not just watching the stars now, he's becoming part of the quiet they represent. A figure who for once doesn't demand worship, just space, just rest. And somewhere out there, beneath the same sky, you know Nemesis is watching too. Not from afar, not with judgment, just with peace, because the chase is long done, and now the stars remember for them both. The stars gleam above like frost-laced pearls, each one holding a piece of a story too old to retell, too familiar to forget. The moon, nearly full, rises over the curve of the eastern ridge, casting silver over the hills, over Zeus, over you. He hasn't moved. Not because he's sleeping, though his breath is slow and his eyes are soft, but because there's nothing left to chase, nothing left to explain. Just night, just stars, just the hush that follows understanding. You hover lower now, barely above the grass. The crickets continue. A breeze stirs gently through the olive branches at the hill's edge. Somewhere down in the valley, a dog barks once and falls silent again. Now here's your historical fact. In the later Hellenistic period, a philosophical movement called apatheia, a kind of spiritual peace through non-reactivity, gained traction among Stoics. They believed even the gods at their highest state felt no anger, no need, no pursuit, only calm, only awareness. It wasn't detachment, it was clarity. The gods had seen everything, and so finally they simply watched. Zeus watches now, not just the stars, but everything, and he does it without wanting. That may be the greatest shift of all. Here's your quirky tidbit. There's a faded inscription on a marble tablet found near Delphi. No author, just 5 words chiseled carefully, but without embellishment. I stopped. She didn't need me. No one knows who she was. But the scholars who study the piece often whisper that it must have been written by or for a god. Zeus shifts ever so slightly, one hand resting gently on his chest, as if steadying himself in the gravity of the moment. Not afraid, not sad, just present. He murmurs something. You can't catch the words. But it doesn't matter, because here on this silent hill, beneath constellations that remember more than any mortal scroll, everything necessary has already been said. Now comes your scholarly debate. Are these kinds of endings real? Could a god who shaped the skies truly stop? Did he, in some myth or fragment or dream, step out of his own legend and into a night that didn't require him to be anything more than a man beside a field? Some say no. Others say that even myths need to exhale eventually. You glance skyward. The swan Cygnus is directly overhead now, wings outstretched, beak pointed ever forward. Flying still, yes, but not fleeing, just moving. And that's when you realize Zeus is not ill in the way. A statue is still. He's still, the way water is still, before it begins to flow again. And if he moves now, it won't be to pursue or perform. It will be to begin something new, but not tonight. Tonight is for the stars, for the long breath between old stories and new ones, for silence, for peace. The night is full now, thick with shadow and silver, with everything it holds hidden under the surface of hush. The moon hangs just above the horizon, tracing a quiet path across Zeus's outstretched body. his hands loose at his sides, his expression softened into something close to release. You hover still, not watching him as a subject or god, but simply as someone who chose to rest. And now, so close to the end of the tale, even the wind seems to ease in reverence. Below the hill, all is still, and on the hill, all is finally enough. Here's your historical fact. In the ancient Greek theatrical tradition, the final act of a play was sometimes called the kamos, a lyrical lament between character and chorus. But there were also plays that ended without one. No cry, no clash, just a long, slow fade into quiet. The Greeks understood that sometimes the most honest closing is silence itself. Zeus breathes in, breathes out, again. And this moment is the quietest the world has ever been around him. He opens his eyes just for a moment. He doesn't look at the stars. He's seen them, named them, warned them. He looks at you and smiles, not widely, not godlike, just knowingly, as if to say, you were here, you saw, thank you. And with that, he closes his eyes again. The earth sighs, the breeze settles, and for the first time, since the story began long before feathers and thunder and misjudged pursuits, he no longer wants to be remembered. He just wants to be. The stars hold steady, the hill holds him, and you, still drifting above, begin to rise slowly higher and higher until even the curve of his body becomes just another shadow softened by starlight. Another shape in the landscape of an old world that has learned how to rest. The night deepens. Even the sky seems to slow its turning, and far below, on a forgotten hill, a god lies asleep in the grass, no longer a figure of myth or pursuit, but simply part of the world's exhale. The story you followed with all its feathers and foolishness has softened into something simpler than legend presence. You might find that your breath is slower now, that your body, like Zeus's, has grown heavier in the best possible way, settling. Rooting. There's nothing left to chase, nothing more to explain, no endings to force, no names to summon. Just starlight, just wind, just the memory of a goose in flight, distant now, and drifting somewhere beyond the reach of telling. Let it go. Let the stars watch over it. Let the night fold around it. Let the dream carry it onward, not because it must, but because it can. As your eyes grow heavier, know this: some stories aren't meant to end, only to fade betly into the kind of sleep that teaches. And you followed one such story all the way here. So now rest. There are no gods to greet, no thunder, to fear, no footsteps to follow. Only stars, only wind, only sleep. Good night.